So why is knowing what goes on in the CPC important for Africa? Let's get you more perspective on that. Earlier, we spoke to Dr. Francis Onditi. He's the head of department at the School of International Relations and Diplomacy at the Riara University here in Nairobi.
I think one of the things that have made China, or rather the CPC, which is actually the ruling party and the leadership, is the policy of non-interference, especially with their partners. Their relation, what we commonly known as or call China-Africa relation, has really been pegged on that policy of non-interference, whether it is politics, whether it is security or economics. But I think there are quite a number of examples. In the last, perhaps let's say 1 decade, China has really entered Africa. And there are quite interesting examples, you know, in terms of trade, in terms of business, in terms of bilateral cooperation. And I can see quite a number of those examples. For instance, we know that the Chinese growth for the last 3 decades, the economic growth has been oscillating between 10%. Now, that economic growth has been the springboard of Chinese entry in Africa. And we realize that as a result of that, the demand has raised, you know, in energy, in infrastructure. For example, 86 billion US dollar from the Chinese banks have actually been invested in African countries. And some of the beneficiary countries have been Kenya, Angola, DRC, Sudan, Ethiopia, and other countries which have business relation with China. And so you realize that as a result of that, there have also been a demand raised in areas to do with direct investment, you know, foreign direct investment, which is also very much thriving as far as the, you know, the trade relation between Africa and China. And finally, we've got exports, you know. More than, in fact, it has been estimated by International Monetary Fund that between 15 to 16% of African export is actually going to China. That means that the China has raised demand for African goods. And don't you remember that even some of the manufacturing industries have also benefited from the Chinese technology input. In many occasions, you'll find that the Chinese technicians, or rather engineers and other workers, are also putting directly into the African manufacturing sector. So it's really been an interesting moment for the relation between China and Africa, and it's pegged on the economic growth, mobility of China in the region of 10% in the last 3 decades.